Okay, hi everyone. So let's get started with the next lecture. This one's going to be on consciousness, attention, track mind, and some other stuff. Okay, so we'll go over consciousness, kind of the basic concepts, and attention. We'll go over sleep and dreams, and depending on time, we might go over drugs and consciousness, or you might have to read this on your own. So what is consciousness? Well, that's not entirely agreed upon, but generally it has something to do with awareness of ourselves and our environment. Right? So obviously being aware of where you're sitting, what you're looking at, what you're listening to, stuff like that would be more or less consciousness. Another way to define it is just, what is it like to be something? Okay, so what's the experience of, say, looking out the window, right? What's the experience you have, picking something up, right? That's another definition of consciousness. Okay, so consciousness, if you go back a ways, was somewhat abandoned, or at least people wanted to abandon it, because it's not really something behavioral, right? Remember, behaviorism is all about, okay, you behave a certain way, you get a reward or you get a punishment, and then that alters your behavior. They don't care or are not interested in what happens behind the scenes, what happens on the cognitive processing level. Right? They don't care about that, just the behavior. So you could probably imagine where this would lead to a lack of interest in consciousness, because consciousness, awareness of things, is really a totally cognitive phenomenon, right? It's not something that is too closely tied to behavior, right? So keep in mind that a lot of what we do is could be thought of in terms of dual processing, right? So things can be processed at both the subconscious and conscious levels, right? We can perform some things like walking or chewing gum without thinking about it consciously, or we can do some things that might require us to be more conscious of what's going on, right? So something like driving, maybe you can do that more unconsciously. Something like figuring out a complex problem might be something you need to do consciously, right? Let me give you one more example. Without lifting your fingers, where's the T key on a keyboard? Might have been hard for you, right? You might have had to try to type for a second there, right? That might be typing as an example of something you could do subconsciously, right? In fact, you're so used to doing it subconsciously that you probably can hardly do it consciously. So what does consciousness actually do? Well, we're not sure about that either. But some have argued that it serves a key evolutionary function, which is to help understand others, right? So for example, maybe the experience and the awareness of, say, being hungry or being cold or whatever it might be helps us understand and work with others, right? You can imagine how, say, you were doing a project or you're trying to get along with someone, being able to kind of put yourself in their shoes and think of the experience of what they might be experiencing could certainly help you function together, right? That could certainly produce evolutionary benefits and help us survive, right? Okay, so moving on from that, we run into the problems of consciousness. And these can be split up into the easy problem and the hard problem, okay? So what we mean by the easy problem is, how does your brain basically do what it does? How does it do math? How does it perceive and attend things? How does it remember things? Those are all what we call easy problems of consciousness, okay? How does the brain perform its performance operations, right? Well, we sort of know the answer to that, but certainly not entirely, but we have some idea. We know it has to do, like we just talked about, with electrical signals, arrangement of neurons, different brain areas, chemical processes, stuff like that, right? So that would be the easy problem. The hard problem is, how does it make us conscious? How do our brains make it so there's an experience of being you, right? So let me put that in more concrete example. Let's compare a person versus a computer doing something, right? So people obviously need to eat to survive. So we go around and make sure we have enough food for the day. Presumably you could program a computer to do the same thing, right? In fact, you could program a computer to do basically all of what we could do, right? If it's something like doing a math problem, adding 5 plus 5. Well, we know that our brain can accomplish that through electrical signals, chemical signals, stuff like that. The computer can accomplish that using its mechanical wire, right? Again, not something we fully understand, but we at least kind of have an idea of how that goes on. So that's the easy problem. Again, how does your brain perform operations? But in contrast, we have no idea how it performs consciousness, right? So comparing to a computer, let's use the example of adding 2 numbers together. Well, when you do it, there's an experience of it, right? There's a conscious experience of what's it like to add 2 numbers together. Maybe it's boring, maybe it's whatever it is, right? In contrast to a computer, there's nothing there. There's no experience of doing that, right? The computer just does it. But there's no conscious sensation and experience of adding 2 numbers together for the computer, presumably, but we're not sure of that either. So with that in mind, the fact that we seem to have this experience of doing something, and other systems that could perform the same operation, again, like a computer, don't have these conscious experiences, well, how the hell does our brain do that? And we don't know. That's why it's the hard problem. We have no idea how our brain creates a conscious experience of existence. So that's what the hard problem is. So that's most of what we're going to talk about for consciousness, but here's some other food for thought. Does consciousness actually do anything? Does it serve a function? We don't know. I mean, the argument about it helping us empathize and understand others seems plausible, but let me give you another example. So maybe you have a conscious experience of remembering something, right? But do you need to just be able to remember it, or does the actual conscious experience of remembering it, does that actually add anything, right? Consciousness, you can almost think of just trailing along, right? Does it actually have an impact on what we do? We're not sure. And there's some research to suggest that no, it doesn't. So, for example, think about something like a speedometer, right? A speedometer is basically tracking the speed, right, of a car. So our conscious experience is very similar to that, right? It's tracking the consciousness of many different things. So say, could be how fast we're going, right? Both of those things, the speedometer and the consciousness, are able to kind of produce this awareness of something. But are they actually contributing in any way? Well, not necessarily, right? Because if you think of the speedometer, it's not actually changing the speed, at least not directly. It's just observing it. So does consciousness act in the same way? Well, maybe. Maybe consciousness is, again, awareness of our speed or what we're doing, but is it actually altering what we're doing or our speed? Like a speedometer would not be doing. We don't know. Another tricky thing that comes with looking at consciousness is how exactly you separate consciousness from awareness. And that's something we don't know either. So you're probably noticing a bit of a trend here. I mean, you could certainly measure awareness, right? Like you can do some sort of attentional test or perception test. How long does it take a person to notice this? How long does it take them to notice that or perceive this or remember this? those are all measurable constructs, right? But at what point the actual experience of perceiving something or attending to something comes in, well, we don't know how to separate that. So that's where consciousness just goes in a constant circle of mystery. I really like consciousness. I think it's fascinating. I don't know how anyone couldn't, but I made a strong decision never to try to research it because it's just a total mystery. I think it's pretty much everyone. There's some people claim to have answers, but they make every answer it feels like we come up with for consciousness just has problems that can't seem to be overcome. So, I mean, with that said, there are more, I guess you could say, tangible and observable things of consciousness. Like you could certainly look at what we call explicit and implicit memory. So this idea of, are you remembering something on a consciousness level or a conscious level versus more unconsciously? I mean, those are testable things. And to separate the actual role of kind of the experience of being, what it's like to remember, that's a whole other story. Okay. So moving on from there, we of course have attention. Attention is the ability, of course, to focus on specific stimuli or locations. So attending to this nice little cat here, or attending to the text. We have what we call selective attention, meaning you're able to focus on one thing and ignore others. So maybe you focus on my voice and ignore the cat, or you focus on the cat and ignore my voice. Understandable. There's also divided attention, meaning you're going to be trying to kind of attend multiple things at once. So maybe you're trying to split your attention between listening to me and looking at the cat here. Okay. So selective attention focuses on your awareness of particular stimuli, like we said, right? And it acts like a spotlight. So focusing on what's going on in a particular area, just like a spotlight, right? This, of course, occurs across multiple senses. It's not so much such as vision, right? We can attend to some things more acoustically than others. So if you're hearing multiple things at once, you can try and drown out one and focus on the other. It's an important ability. But also keep in mind that not all things are equally attendable, right? So obviously some things can grab our attention more than others. So you hear, say, explosion, this is gonna grab your attention, obviously, right? But there's a lot of research, really interesting research on what different things can more easily grab our attention. And one interesting finding is something known as the cocktail party effect. And this is generally the finding that our names are really easy to attend to. So if you're at a cocktail party, there's a lot of conversations going on, and you hear someone across the room mention your name. It's really easy for that to grab your attention. Right? So your name has what we call a low threshold of attention. Hearing your name amongst a whole lot of other audio stimuli makes it really easy. Your name is still gonna usually be able to grab your attention. Okay, that's the cocktail party effect. Okay, so while we're on the subject of attention, you're probably wondering about driving and cell phones. And the answer is that you should most definitely not drive and use your cell phone. Not sure. I think it's still legal in Colorado, but texting and talking is involved in about 28% of accidents. So keep that in mind. It doesn't matter if it's hands-free. So some had argued that having to actually take your phone, maybe dial it, hold it up to your ear is an issue. And if you have hands-free stuff, then it'd be way better. But the evidence doesn't actually support that. Hands-free devices seem to be just as bad pretty much as actually using this regular cell phone. And it's even worse with texting. Texting while driving means you're 23 times more likely to in an accident. So texting is definitely not something you should be doing while driving. 23 times more likely. Okay, so let's move on here. So one of the big findings in attention in the last while is this concept known as change blindness. And this is a failure to notice a change in our environment, right? So for example, let's say I looked away and I swapped to a different t-shirt. Would you notice that? Probably not. Even say my hair changed color, you might not notice that. People are actually surprisingly bad at noticing changes to their environment. We're going to look at some examples. So the way change blindness is tested is you show people a picture, usually a static picture. It's followed by a quick blank screen, and then they see what's almost the same picture except for one change. So your job is to look at this picture, I'll flip to the other picture, and you have to notice what the change is. Okay? Give it a shot. So there's actually a couple changes going on here. Oh, 3 actually. I'll give you another minute. Okay, thumbs up. I didn't actually get the change. Probably a lot of people didn't. So first change is up here, the branch. Notice the branch disappears. Next thing, notice the people over to the left here, they disappear. Last one, there's this building off in the distance, that's going to disappear. Pretty wild. Pretty hard too, right? This is change blindness. So again, it would seem so easy, like, oh, I would notice those changes easily, but no, definitely not. People are very bad at this, myself included. So one thing you might be wondering is change blindness, is it just these peripheral objects? So is it just something like this kind of insignificant branch, or these kind of people or building off in the distance? Is it just that stuff that people miss? Or will they notice something more conspicuous? Well, let's have a look at that. I just have to turn my sound back on. You are about to take part in a quick experiment. Okay, now, if you happen to notice anything odd, watch again. Don't worry if you didn't see these two differently. An easier way to do is exactly what it should be. It's focusing on the meaning of the sentence rather than on the irrelevant details. Imagine how much energy and brain mass it would take for us to remember every single person, place, or thing. I think that So just keep in mind that distinction. We'll talk about inattentional blindness next, but the change blindness and inattentional blindness are actually different, so make sure you don't confuse them. So that's kind of something to think about, right? Is that because we're constantly shifting our attention, we have the impression like we take in everything, right? But so, for example, if I were to ask you, you notice that sign behind the guy here, or that um, whatever it is, poster board, paperboard, whatever. You would say yes, right? Because your attention does this so fast, it switches your attention so quickly to this Maryville Arts Center thing. And it almost seems like you were aware of it the whole time. But in reality, you only switched your attention to it because I asked you to. Pretty wild, right? So, like you noticed here, it's not just kind of less conspicuous things like a branch or some people in the distance. Oftentimes, people will miss that they're talking to a different person, right? And like they said, the basic concept behind this is that there's so much going on in our environment, we can only take in and remember and encode a certain amount of it, right? So you're looking at a scene like this, you can remember the overall meaning. You can remember there's this statue or thing of the world, kind of on the water, a bunch of clouds in the distance and some buildings. You're not going to remember all the specifics, like a branch or people in the distance. You might remember if you're looking at a person, kind of what their, like I said, rough height is, maybe you remember their roughly what their age is, stuff like that. But even when even when the change is enough that it's a different person, if they're not really noticeably different, you're still going to miss it. Okay, the next one, this is the idea of inattentional blindness. So this is a failure to see something when our vision is directed elsewhere. So let's do another demo. Even mugs for the camera, and a lot of people still miss them. So that's inattentional blindness. Finding that working on one task, we can miss really conspicuous things like a gorilla because we're absorbed in the current task, right? So failure to see something when your vision is directed elsewhere seems pretty dismal for something like driving with cell phones, right? You're thinking about your cell phone, who's texting you, the odds that you're going to notice, a pedestrian or a potential collision, not very good, right? That's inattentional blindness. So keep that in mind.